Hello and welcome to the Cardiff Met Sports Coaching Hub podcast.
I'm Ollie Lamb.
And I'm Mike Castle.
We're here to bring you insights around all of the latest cutting-edge research within coach education and practice.
You can stay up to date with all of our latest episodes through the links in the podcast description below.
We hope you enjoy the episode.
Okay, hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Cardiff Met Sport Coaching Hub podcast. It's cosy in the podcast studio today. I'm joined by three guests, Professor Robyn Jones, Dr. Charlie Corsby and Dr. Gethin Thomas. And we're talking today about a recently published article, Bordering, Connecting and Dispelling Within Sports Coaching, Erasing the Practitioner-Scholar Divide. Should we do some quick introductions to start with? You've all been on the podcast for episodes before, but for any new listeners, worthwhile doing quick introductions. Charlie, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, so Charlie Corsby, I am a senior lecturer in sport coaching at Cardiff Met. I work in football, all my history is in football, and have a real strong passion for coaching naturally, which is why I'm here. I have a licence, UEFA A licence, and that probably summarises most of my coaching.
Keth?
Yeah, so I'm Gethin Thomas, and I'm a senior lecturer in sports coaching here at Cardiff Met. I'm also the research lead in sports coaching as well. So from a practical side, which is not a good thing because of what we're discussing today, I'm a rugby coach. I coach the championship team here at Cardiff Met, and I'm a level 4 rugby union coach as well, but interested in coaching all sports.
And I'm a professor of sport and social theory here at Cardiff Met, with a particular view of my research on the interaction and the learning that happens within the coach-athlete environment and dyad.
Great, super. So the paper then, we've come into the studio and everyone is throwing the responsibility in your direction, Robyn. Where did the inspiration for this particular paper come from?
Square passes, or rather not. The inspiration, as a lot of the work I've been involved in over the years, it's come from annoyance. I've been called a lot worse than an angry young man, but it seems to be where a lot of my work actually originated from. And from kind of throwaway lines, comments I've heard over the years at various kind of seminars and conferences and gatherings, kind of such as, I know that you do research, but we live in the real world. Or you should really listen to what the practitioners actually say, because they're the ones who actually do the work. Or there's far too much theory here. It'll go over the coaches' heads. And I found this a very uninformed view, really, which annoyed me. And it was insulting to the ones that we work with as coaches, I think, also. And this is because that the best theory, or what I regard as the best theory, kind of social theory, as coaching is a social thing, it comes from the study of practice itself. It may not be the thing, but it's the next thing to it. It's the closest thing to it when we study the practice of coaching, observe it, listen to what's been said there. And so the actuality is not so divorced, really, kind of from the abstract. So that's where the roots of the sentiment that runs through the paper lie.
But this isn't something that's been isolated in sport coaching. So you've made reference in the paper to the fact this is very similar in broader educational fields, particularly within medicine, nursing, etc. So why is it you think so many fields experience that same disconnect? Is it because of these perceptions of academia, or the sort of the high levels of abstraction that we see in the theory, so to speak, are so far?
I think one of the reasons why I think there seems to be almost an implicit anti-intellectualism within society at the moment, and this is, I think, partly really kind of founded on the fact that universities haven't really advertised what their role really within society actually is. And so they're kind of seen as being somehow outside society, somehow above it, looking down on something. And of course, universities, as much as any other institutions, actually exist within society. It's a part of the kind of fabric of society. So I think it comes really, kind of from there, and it takes a certain courage, a bravery, I think, to actually say, hold on a minute. They are not kind of separate things. They are one and the same things, although kind of different aspects of something larger. So I would kind of suspect that the roots of it lie there, because as you said, Mike, it's not only with our field, that we see this kind of sentiment actually expressed.
I want to pick on that anti-intellectualist idea, because it's quite a derogatory term, I suppose, to describe those that maybe aren't engaging in the stuff that's produced by universities, the theory, etc. But coaches have been accused of being somewhat anti-intellectualists, not interested in reading, somewhat ambivalent about the theory that's actually out there. So why is it we've got so far as to actually accuse coaches of being anti-intellectualists, do you think?
Maybe it's just the maturity of of the field, which is starting to ask itself some pretty fundamental issues and questions now. It's more so magnified, I think, in our area as such, because you don't have to have a degree to coach, even though that we say like it's a profession, etc. You don't have to have a degree. In fact, the NGBs, have their own routes and pathways. And that's what you need to actually access the job, like in many, many ways. So these things are seen to be developing along separate rail tracks in many ways. It doesn't happen that way all over the world. Like in some other countries, you do largely have to have a degree in the subject to coach. It's not the same here. And that's something I really lament.
I think even to add to that, I just think it's not even a degree with some point. It's even that within rugby, for example, you don't even need the qualifications, the national governing body qualifications to coach at a professional level or international level. Mm-hmm. So that sort of positions what they think about, learning and theoretical understanding within coaching as well. So you don't need it, and if you get experience, actually most of it is playing experience. If you've played at a certain level, then you should be able to coach. So that's another challenging thing, I think, as well, is the actual playing experience and linked how, and that transfer to coaching knowledge as well.
And this is not blue sky thinking either, because there's some really good examples of where research and practice are interwoven with each other. They wrap around each other. Robyn's mentioned around having a degree to coach, but you can think about what a teacher might be expected to do. They have to have a degree before they can get onto a PGC. Or perhaps if you look to a different discipline, you look to physiotherapy. Physiotherapy is a chartered vocation. You have to have a degree in order to be classed as a physio. It's a protected title. And as a part of maintaining your protected title, you need to do certain hours of CPD. You need to evidence that you continually professionally developing. And so a part of that is their relationship with new knowledge, how they're integrating new knowledge within their practice, how they're thinking about that with their vocation. And so there's some really good examples as well. It's not like this is just coming from a particular coaching sphere. That actually there's some alternative ways of thinking about it. So it's not like, it's just coming from nowhere, this either. We have some really good examples as well, where the integration between new knowledge, i.e. thinking about what the role of the university is, and then how that fits in with practice also is related.
But I just want to say as well that maybe, and perhaps, some of this attitude of anti-intellectualism is not wholly unjustified. Some of the work that has emanated within the area has been far too linear, far too easy, not insightful enough and critical enough. And so it's very difficult for anybody working to actually relate to it in terms of it representing or being to inform what their reality actually is. So in some respects, perhaps we've asked for that kind of a backlash and kickback from practitioners.
So it works both ways, essentially, then, is, I suppose, what we're saying here is perhaps coaches we'd like them to try a little bit harder with some of the reading that may very well speak to their realities, perhaps a little bit more. But at the same time, the academic discourse is no doubt challenging. The terminology that's used within academia is not the same as the terminology that you'll find on a governing body qualification, for example. And so there are some disparities and differences between the levels, I suppose, certainly the language that's used. We've spoken quite a lot. You're pulling a funny face.
I'm pulling a
at me,
face
Rob.
here as
we
well,
go.
and I'm in danger, of contradicting myself, which I've been known to do on a regular basis, Mike. It's, like all of us have been engaged on a coach ed, and there's a variety really within the audience, within those who attend. And yet we speak about quite heavy social theory if you were to read it out of a book. Existentialism, for example, which we'll mention later. And this is not lost on coaches. It's just making it accessible to coaches. So it's just trying to present it in a way that they can relate to, without kind of simplifying it, that it has no relevance. But I do think it's a bit of an insult, as I said before, to actually hear they won't buy this. This will go over their heads. I do think that we underestimate, but then we have to do a better job in actually making the case.
I think that's a really good point. And one of the things that we kind of played around when we were writing the article was actually the use of, I think it features in the introduction, the use of the term othering. This sense of actually in trying to have kind of an authority over a particular idea, you might flatten someone else, i.e. so you put more authority on theory and therefore you then flatten practice, or if you put more authority on practice, you flatten the role of theory. And therefore, if you take such a binary, then you're then in danger of othering people to get a grasp of the actual ideas that you're talking about and the way that we might talk about it and how that actually unfolds in day-to-day doings of coaching.
The door is open.
An olive branch to whom, Mike? Because all of us, we're coaches, are coaches, so we can speak from that positionality as well. So an olive branch to who?
Well, this is me falling into the trap of the othering, I suppose. I'm reading this article as if it's theoretical. It's academic, I suppose, isn't it? Which, of course, is speaking to coaches. But I also read it in a way that was sort of perhaps, there are challenges in working with governing bodies and particular people at governing bodies, like you've just mentioned there. Oh, coaches won't buy this. I mean, I have my own experiences of working with a governing body who say, Mike, it's intimidating speaking to you. So, to a degree, I see a bit of separation between the two because of the way in which academia is perceived versus how our work with governing body is perceived by us as well. So is this not somewhat of an offering of, do you know what, there has been this divide, but we need to bring it back together again?
I know I've got to hold my hand up and say, I've been quite guilty myself, and it comes to the in the section you mention authoritative legitimacy. I can't even say it, legitimacy, right? And I think at times I've been guilty of that, because when I speak with people, I tend to, what do you do? I say I'm a sports coaching lecturer, and I try to justify myself as a sports coaching lecturer. I say, well, I look at social theory, and I look at pedagogical theories. And I'm thinking, why am I doing this? Don't I think this subject is legitimate, and I'm guilty of it myself. So in a way, tying to some of these ideas is that, is that this idea of social knowledge isn't acknowledged as being maybe as good, as intellectual as brain surgery, or anything as we've sort of brought it into the attention within the paper. And I think at times, I've been guilty of that myself. So I think it's not overcoming that, but it's acknowledging that, and then realizing that now, as a coach, I don't see a separation, and it's become such of a part of everything I do that I can't see, it's theory and practice. And a lot of the, in the last sort of 15 years or whatever it is, I've been engaging with theory. And we'll probably go on to just discuss some of these ideas. I don't see there's I just use theory, or I think in that way. And I think all four of us are probably in a similar position.
Yeah. So why is it important to try and address this now? I'm sure there's been attempts to try and address it to a certain degree before, but why now to try and sort of really take this head on?
I think it's just frustration a lot of the time when you're out there speaking with coaches, then away from this with some of these ivory towers of Cardiff Met, as they'd say, you do get frustrated. There's definitely, with some coaches, there's no interest at all in there, and it's still quite frustrating, especially after over 20 years of research being conducted with so many people coming here as well. We've had plenty of coaches coming here and spreading the word, but we still have this, why do I need that? Why do we, I can just go out coaching, and from my own experiences, I will learn and I will become a better coach. I don't need to go and engage with these ideas. So to me, it's a bit with frustration, working even on some of the coaching, we do actually run some coach education courses within the university and with nationally governing bodies as well. And that's where the frustration comes for me.
I think to add to that as well, there's an implicit sentiment around quality in here as well. Quality in terms of thinking about how the work that we do in the coaching hub, the research, the practice that we're involved in actually reflects those everyday realities. And we can think about how that connection between ideas and practice and new ideas and moving things forward can be actually stimulated as well. Because like Robin mentioned earlier, there's, whilst the area it feels like it's growing, there's more journals, there's more research that's being produced, there's more courses, more degree courses, there's more NGBs, there's more NGB courses that are being delivered. There's a question of quality in here as well. And where do we go for quality, and how do we then sustain some of that quality as well? And I think the paper really speaks to some of that. And that's why some of the ideas are presented in there. Here's some ways in which we might think about maintaining, protecting, developing some of that quality around what actually constitutes our profession and our field of study as well.
Yeah. Sorry, Mike, it's just to go back to the annoyance thing. This stuff is not new. And this is another part of the annoyance, I think, that we feel. You can really trace it back to Immanuel Kant, who tried to find a way through the empiricism and the rationality, the armchair theorizing, and doing work in the field. It's just that we seem, and other fields to a certain degree, we seem to have ignored all that. We seem to have already made our minds up that this is what we're going to be about. It's going to be decontextualized practice, and then we drive up this railroad. We just ignore all that stuff. So the annoyance comes from, when we see articles now written, all of us are involved in different journals, there's a lack of recognition of work that's gone before. It's almost kind of self-referencing in many ways, and to a certain extent we're all guilty of that. But the lack of wide-ranging engagement with the literature to make the case for the article, it speaks to some of this isn't relevant to me as a coach. It's not relatable to me as a coach, and so therefore just feeds the divide.
Because coaching's the last 20 or 30 years now has taken that sociological turn. We're starting to see those ideas from Vygotsky and Kant, etc. Like you're talking about, Robin, there. I mean, these are works that they're not from the last 20, 30 years. They're from 100 years ago, even more in a lot of circumstances. So I can definitely see that ignorance perhaps to some of those coming through there. But perhaps these ideas are still maybe not being accepted by the people, perhaps, I suppose, in the governing bodies that could perhaps try to implement some of these ideas into formal coach education so that we can see perhaps a bit more of a meshing together of these ideas. Is it because of that I guess, ignorance of some of the older literature that we're struggling to find that level of acceptance, or where does that challenge come from? Where does that lack of acceptance come from?
Well, the way that you have conceptualized the work of coaching, the doing, is that it's a social thing. It involves more than one, with invisible rings of social features that influence what's going on in the context. It's not a decontextualized activity. So where do we go to find out more about this and to learn more about this? It's usually in literature rooted in social concerns, and therefore kind of sociology. Now, if you ask anybody, well, what's the value of sociology? They would not be able to answer that. They could probably answer something about kind of psychology. They could certainly answer something about, like about medicine. But when you ask somebody, about, right, okay, well, where's that going to lead you? Or what kind of job are you going to get with sociology? There's an absolute ignorance of it. But if you really think about it, it's how we get on together in society to learn to thrive together, not just kind of survive together. We need kind of social knowledge. We need knowledge of the other. But we don't value that in any explicit way. We just think it's a taken for granted thing. So there's no recognition of that value. And it's akin to the analogy that, a fish can't see the water it swims in. It doesn't think it needs that water. It just can't see it. And it's much the same with us when we kind of examine a discipline like kind of sociology, to develop those kind of social attributes that you can do very, very well in civic society and make a contribution. But we don't value it.
One of the ways that I suppose the drawing together of these two lines of thought has tried to happen is through perhaps adopting some new strange language, pracademia, practical theorists, etc. I'm going to come to you on this one, Geth, because I know you're a fan of talking about language, etc. Is the creation of these kind of terms and the adoption of these kind of terms not a good thing in a sense if they bring things together, or is that somewhat of a diluted version of what it is you're actually calling for in this paper?
I think, first I have to acknowledge that I've actually used the word in a few chapters and the things we've written. And I think we just briefly mentioned it earlier. I think this dualism, this separation, it doesn't help. And I think we've mentioned it. Charlie, you just mentioned it earlier, didn't you? The fact that you are you creating the idea of the pracademic then as being superior to a normal academic or to a coach, and that that the idea that comes through in the paper. That doesn't help as well. But having this sort of trying to combine words in order to, and this dualist ideas, I think doesn't help. It's back to, this idea of legitimacy again. And I do think, the ideas we do discuss in the paper of how you get rid of this dualism, back to some of Kant's ideas, and some of those. Is how you go beyond it. If you go beyond the dualistic ideas of mind and body, and if you can combine those together, then you can move things forward in that way. And I think that's the key part for what we're saying, is don't look at them as separate, and try and move forward with the ideas together. Your experiences are important, but how the theory comes from your experience, comes from the experiences. So how can that help you in the day-to-day? So when I'm standing on the pitch, how can a teaching and learning theory or a learning theory support the way I interact in this session? So it's not about, okay, I go away and memorize this theory and try and remember how to do it. It's how does that make me conscious and to think during my practice?
Because the whole idea and notions of theory to practice, they're things that we've had on our programs here at the university as well. Modules that have the words theory to practice in them. We're almost sort of I guess, adding to that artificial divide ourselves. So has there been a change of mind, perhaps, about the way we think about these two things as a result of the frustration? Have we had different perspectives previously and now we're stating a new position here?
So I think the first thing that I would maybe clarify here as well is the theory to practice is one idea that we're talking about in the paper. But the fundamental point is around the identities, scholar, practitioner, and how building and identifying with and buffering up around one of those identities is perhaps where some of the really unhelpful part lies. And then it creates an unhelpful divide between theory and practice. So theory and practice, as we kind of articulated in the second half of the paper, is around this kind of dialectical between theory and practice, ideas, putting it into realities, doing the work, then going back to the ideas and the ideas coming out of that work in itself. So they're indivisible in the sense of they wrap around each other. And I think that's something that has been consistent through the argument. So if you go to Robyn's introductory chapter on the sociology of sport coaching book, the introductory chapter is a really good one that actually starts to really outline how there is nothing more practical than theory, and how there is nothing, and how theory can then start to then inform practice. So that kind of, again, that dialectic between them, not trying to create this division. So I don't think it's a radical move away from theory and practice and how ideas can start to inform, shape, and help improve the quality and the consciousness of what we're doing as coaches. I think the unhelpful bit comes from this, the buffering up between identities of, well, I'm a scholar of coaching, and then you are a practicing coach, or I'm a practicing coach and you're a scholar of coaching. That's where the unhelpfulness comes from. And I think, as we started in the podcast, we all kind of outline that we're coaches, we're practicing coaches, and some have been for many, many, many years. And so it's unhelpful to actually trying to kind of divide between the two of them. I always struggle with that question, and I think one of the reasons I always struggle with it is I don't know where to go with it, because I'm actually conscious of this kind of like, well, where do I lean on in terms of my identity? So I think that's where I would kind of position the paper around these unhelpful divides with scholar and practitioner. The theory to practice is a way of actually better breaking down and thinking about how we can erase some of those kind of unhelpful divides that we might make between scholars, practitioners. The theory to practice is the way of actually informing that and doing it and putting it into life and living it, how we might educate around it and give us ideas on how we might be able to do that education as well.
I think Charlie's absolutely right. But also with Gethin, I think we've been somewhat complicit here, just in the strap lines of book titles. One of the early ones I wrote was From Practice to Theory, which was indeed, it was meant, even at that early stage, to raise some questions about the kind of split identity, like of the things themselves as well as ourselves. So it was well-intentioned, and probably was an early attempt, not explicitly so, but still, the use of language encouraged a thinking that went, well, are you a theorist or are you somebody who does the practice? Which, unless you actually read the book and you read into these things, then you don't get at the nuance of what Charlie's getting at, that actually it's an effort to break it down.
I think another example of that actually comes from when we get labelled some of the work, we actually, in a general sense, some of the work gets labelled as a sociology of coaching, as if sociology leads the coaching part. So I'm a sociologist who then studies coaching practice. I think that description can actually also be unhelpful. Again, really well-intentioned, and it links to what Robyn mentioned earlier around, well, where's the essence of some of this work coming from? It's coming from relations, it's coming from the sociality of coaching and like trying to get a grip of that. And so inevitably, the ideas might preside in sociological orientated reading, but it's not we're not sociologists. It should be almost like, I don't know how you'd flip it, coaching and theory and a set of ideas, because I'm not wedded to sociology either. I'm wedded to coaching. I think I heard it described the other day as a coachingologist, study of coaching. And then the way that you might study that coaching is actually by drawing upon some different ideas and not being too kind of firm around where those ideas come from, but also having some grounding as to what's going to be relevant, what's going to be quality, what's going to have impact, what's going to develop new knowledge and ideas as well. But I think some of those labeling, again, it's identity kind of buffering that can also be slightly unhelpful.
Mm. Is there not something in this labeling, though, that's quite helpful? I mean, we typically try to box things into certain areas to try and just get by in the world. You separate theory from practice. You separate formal coach education from informal coach education. You separate university from, national governing body qualifications, etc. You kind of have to split them to a certain degree, right?
Yeah, but I think what you're talking about there, Mike, is like different parts of the coaching puzzle, which, inevitably you're going to need to label to reduce some of that complexity. But what we're talking about is something more essential, I think, here, more essential to the activity, more essential to where new knowledge is coming from. And so in that regard, labeling it then can be quite limiting, can be quite restrictive. And it can be quite othering, which is kind of, again, the sense of where this paper is coming from, the otheringness. We're trying to actually break that down, not to label it just to deal with that complexity, but it's actually to try and remove it away so we can get perhaps a more, for want of a better word, more authentic grasp of the everyday practicalities of coaching. Mm.
Which we'll speak to a lot of the episodes that we've done recently with you, Robyn, with Charming, with Sophia, etc. This sort of call for trying to understand the doing of coaching, trying to craft some kind of a space, I suppose, where we're not drawing upon all of these previous, the more royal sciencey psychologies, etc. It's
but I don't think that the labeling it's not necessarily bad, because labeling, it's also like an enabling mechanism that you can then kind of see things in the practice that you could not previously see. This is a part of Luhmann's observation theory, is that you have to name something in order that you can identify it. But what's really Charlie's really emphasizing well there is that if you rush your label, or if you start with your label, you can only see, really what the confines of the label are, what the construct actually is. So you've made a decision ahead of your context. So acknowledging that if you go in, really as as a researcher, that you go in and observe a coaching session, you immediately see, and this is just not me saying it, but you immediately see there's an action going on here that involves more than one individual. It's not self-contained. There's interaction going here. So where do we go to see what we can learn more about this, or what has been written in this, without being overly led by it and concept-centered? We go to literature that tends to lean on kind of social ideas and concepts, as opposed to, for example, kind of psychological ones like a biomechanical ones or physiological ones, because that's really what is happening here, like over and above everything else.
I think it's fair to say, right, going back to being accessible, it's once these ideas are presented to coaches, right, and we've had coaches at all levels, some who've done degrees, some who left school at 16, right? Once you make that idea, these social or pedagogical ideas accessible to these individuals, they can engage with them. They can go out into a professional, rugby union coaching environment, and they can use these ideas, and they can think with these ideas, and that's we've got definitely coaches who left school, and I think maybe it's gone straight to be professional rugby players. So at time, it's just it may be just the complexity of the language puts people off, and it may be some more deeper issues than just the actual the subject itself. It's just that the ideas can be engaged by anyone. And maybe that, again, I could hold my hand up, and maybe we're a bit guilty sometimes of not, it's not dumbing down, but maybe it's how do we present these ideas? Because I can't think of anyone we've worked with who thinks, oh, that's a load of rubbish. I don't think there's anybody who's worked in any of the social theories presented and said, "Oh, power's that's nothing to do with what we do."
And I think that really also speaks to, let's go back to a point that we made earlier around the quality of the work. Part of the quality that we will claim with the work that we produce is that it comes from the practice itself. So Robyn's just mentioned around, if you go and observe practice that's unfolding, coaching practice, well, these are methods that we use, that we implement within the design of our research. Go and spend time with people, hang out with them, see what it is that they do, speak to them, ask them what it is that they're explaining and how they're doing things, what they understand, how they're able to articulate it, and then start to think around, like, what's going on here? How can I use this to address a particular set of research questions? How can I use this to understand a particular phenomena? So it comes from the practice itself. And I think this is where perhaps some of the theory practice divide that you mentioned earlier, Mike, this is where some of the issues get exaggerated. Because if the theory that is being pronounced is detached from practice in and of itself, i.e. how it's been produced in the first place, take a model, for instance, that we would criticize as being reductive, not capturing the realities of practice, and perhaps even the methods that would lead to creating that model, they are reductive in and of themselves, then you're going to get something that is then detached from practice. And so then I can really see why there's this why some of these barriers become apparent. But I suppose to go back to some of the essence of what we might do when we're trying to produce this knowledge is that we go to the practice itself. We try and understand what that practice is, and therefore create ideas that can then be related to those who are doing it, whether that be in the same context or in different contexts as well. So this is where some of the subtlety of the argument comes out. And I think that's where maybe some of our own kind of difficulties come from, that the quality of the work that has been produced in the area, it doesn't come from practice in a way that is really gets a grip of that practice. And therefore you're then perpetuating some of these divides as well. And that's where perhaps some of the implicit erasing of some of those divides comes down by actually calling for more quality in terms of being willing to accept some of these ideas, and quality of what those ideas actually look like in and of themselves.
I think there's a bravery in wanting to go to accept some of our ideas. We try to reclaim ideas like power. It's often considered a bit of a taboo word, a dirty word in coaching. You're meant to talk about empowerment. But the example I often give, as a football coach, okay, let's imagine that I've gone to say, look, I need you to think for yourselves on the field. And just, sort of left it there. So don't look at me on the touchline for instruction all the time. And of course, it's not inherently bad advice. But let's say that we have, or I have someone who's a centre forward who has a wonderfully imaginative idea. He's come up, or she's come up with the idea herself or himself, and wants to be a second goalkeeper. So they behave like a second goalkeeper, radical, unbelievable. And they catch the ball, we give away a penalty, we lose 1-0. So I'm saying after the game, what were you thinking of? Well, you told me to think for myself on the field, and I thought that would be a good thing to do. So it's not that you don't want to affirm individuals and make sure that they know that they're of value and they're absolutely worthwhile. Ultimately, it is their performance, of course it is. But not to engage with, you have to do things in this way, which is an exercise of influence and power, is absolutely unrealistic regarding the job. Because what you're trying to do as a coach is trying to influence how an athlete will go about their performance, hopefully to improve it in lots of different ways and different means. But there's an inherent influential relationship here. And that's not engaged with in a lot of the literature.
You mentioned the word bravery there, or a requirement of bravery, and one of the headings in the paper, we'll move on to this now, timing's perfect. You said towards a brave new coaching world. What was the rationale behind using that word brave?
It wasn't particularly with recourse to Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, which is a dystopian novel. Wasn't particularly. But we felt that we had to be brave here because no one else was talking about it. We felt it and we knew it because of our experiences and our readings and our discussions. So, and you mentioned earlier, was it an olive branch to somebody? I would say no. I think it was virtually trying to say, please stop this, and let's try to rebuild, or just enhance the building of it. I'm not saying that we should start from ground zero, but we should almost kind of redirect our efforts here. So it wasn't an olive branch. It was a call to radically rethink. And I think, well, I would say it, of course, but I do think we make a case here, a good case. And my concern is, and I know you'll get to this at the end, but my concern is, will we get the readership that would influence kind of future work? I don't know, because that's part of the problem with the field.
I quite like the Huxley reading of that title though, because actually, like Robyn's saying, it goes back to practice. Can we improve the practice? And I think some of where the ideas are coming from, if you think right now as this recording is happening, thinking about the technological advancements, everyone turns to technology for new solutions, more technology, more performance analysis. How can AI help with coaching practice? How can AI help with patterns of play, for instance, in football? And these kind of like real technological advancements. And I think in some senses, we are calling for, we'll get back to what's essential to coaching, which is working with people and relations. And so I kind of liked that brave new idea, new world sense that comes out of the title. It's a slightly different reading, but...
Are we not really going, it's not a new world though, we're just going back to what we should be doing as human beings. Consciousness, think critically. I know it's a brave new world from the direction we go in, but are we moving away from technology, are we? This is what we're saying. We need to go back and because this is what, if the articles we're arguing is that we don't want to be stuck in the day-to-day. We're living, if you're doing that, you're living on experience, you're living on trial and error. I'll try this. Does it work? No, it doesn't. I'll go and try this. So if you do that in the day-to-day, that's you're going to end up trying to improve in that way. What we're trying to do is to get people to think again, to critically think and make a decision on what I'm going to do with these ideas. That's moving away slightly from the technology. We want you to be, okay, start thinking again. Don't rely on these numbers. Well, or if you've got numbers, how are you going to think with them critically?
Yes, this is not an argument. It's not an argument against the technology.
No, it's how to use the technology in a way which will improve your team or your individual athlete. So it's not critical of technology, but how do we, again, not become stuck in experiences that we have day to day, and that is where our theory-informed work gives a coach or somebody engages with it a way to look at something differently. So it's the idea of Vygotsky everyday understanding is doing things from day to day. The scientific concepts, which are theories, sort of. If you become, if that becomes in a part of the relationship between the both, then suddenly this dialectical river we mentioned is we start seeing things and it transforms you individually, and then you can act differently upon your coaching situation. So that's the whole purpose of the idea.
But just want to emphasize again that this is not an anti-technological, informational argument.
No, because
it's not.
Yeah, because
it's to think in depth with that new technology and the criticality needed, because we know at the moment a lot of the technology is used to beat athletes with, is used to highlight, where they should have done things. So, often with the best of intentions, but that's not what we're talking about here.
So just to add to that, there's some of the work I've been doing recently is with another cultural historical theorist, Galperin. So moving from Vygotsky, it is with performance analysis. It is with videos, but it's about learning within how do you use technology and language and interact in order to get the best tactical or decision making or knowledge or learning in that environment. So it's not saying, let's go back to using the chalkboard or something. It's back to, it is, how do you engage with these things in the right way? Well, in a way which will promote learning. And again, it comes down to relationships again, and we go back to all these things where it is about, all the relationships between people and power and all that kind of thing.
Now, within this particular chapter, you've presented 3 ideas, I suppose, to try and draw these somewhat parallel lines together. The first of which is trying to use sensitizing concepts. So, Robyn, if I come to you on this one, what are sensitizing concepts? What purpose do they serve in helping us to draw together these interrelated lines?
Well, in one way, it's kind of founded on the old adage that, and it's a very simplistic statement, of course, that you don't know what you don't know. So in lots of ways, they represent an effort to inject some new knowledge into the equation of learning, into the generation of learning. So in essence, they should help us just make sense of what we experience, see, and hear, because otherwise, if you just reflect on your practice, you go back to your existing knowledge base. There's advantage in that because sometimes, you've forgotten. But you're not really expanding your knowledge base or deepening your knowledge base as a consequence of that. So you need to read widely. And this is something that's very, very important. You need to read widely, like in order that you can somehow see more things, within your practice, some more events, occurrences, identify them. And these become the kind of sensitizing concepts. But then as you do this, you should be thinking about what you're seeing in relation to the sensitizing concepts, not starting with a sensitizing concept and implanting it really like on the data. So it should be data-led, but as you see things so-called emerging or constructing, you then make a decision to either look for more of them or to think, actually, I don't see any more of this. There must be other things that are going on within the context, so let me look for those.
Sorry, can I when you say data, you're meaning a coach's experience, their observations.
The coach's observations, let's say that they've started a session at kind of 6:30 and they've got the warm-up going, etc. What really are they involved in? After they've explained the session, that they've laid everything out, what really are they involved in? 80%, 90% is actually observation. So to ask the question, how do you theorize your observations? What do you see here? Like in relation to what you want to happen, then you should be relying on some of the work that we engage with to actually help you because they're enabling to see more. Yeah, but this is where that you shouldn't really just observe and take your data like at face value. And this is where the sensitizing idea really starts to come into its own. It's not just that someone has dropped the ball. Okay, maybe their feet were in the wrong place or their hands are in the wrong place. We're talking about, what's netball or basketball, but maybe there were other things that are working around that athlete to make this a lot more likely that it will happen again, like unless you somehow give feedback to rectify it. So what are you looking for? And what do you see accordingly? And this is where the idea of kind of sensitizing ideas and concepts start to come into their own. So they should be emanating out of the literature, but then used in relation to what one sees within the unfolding practice itself. And they should be enabling and not restricting. Of course, the danger is that you start to see them all over the place because you're not looking for anything else. But this depends on you as a coach and quality of mind thing that we might explore like a bit later about how not to overemphasize something at the expense of other things that may be going on. But observations, and we don't talk about the observations of coaches half enough. And this is an area that we're all interested in. So the wider issue then, you've got this almost this interrelationship in between theory, which is represented really by the sensitizing concept, and the practice itself. So they're both kind of feeding each other, kind of symbiotically. So there is no divide. It's not as if I'm engaged in theoretical work now, I'm getting practical work now. They are indivisible. And so this was an example that we make the case earlier, like really in the article, that there should be indivisibility. Okay, well, this is an example of how it can be achieved.
I'm glad you pointed out that notion of observation in there. For a coach to make best use, perhaps, of sensitizing concepts, is there a prior step maybe that is to try and develop their observation skills? Is, having observation skills or an understanding of what exactly they're observing, is that something required in the first instance before they can?
Probably that's one of the things. Of course, the other thing is the wide reading. So you have more concepts at your disposal somehow, or in your knowledge base that you can refer to. Yeah, remember that if you don't have a label for something, if you don't have a name for something, and then you can't see it, it's very, very difficult to see. Perhaps you can feel it, but unless you have a label you can see, then you can work and develop it. So they're both, I think, the observational, what are you looking for, the foreground and the background, the relegation that Luhmann talks about. But also, okay, without that, if you can't see something in the first place because you can't identify it, that's probably wasted effort.
And the whole idea of reading widely could be something that's quite scary for a lot of coaches. If they're not particularly engaged with research, they're not going hunting for journal articles necessarily. That's a brave step for them then. Is that what you're touching on with the idea of bravery, to go and try something, try reading something, read it again, struggle with it?
I think that what you're raising, Mike, is a much wider issue there, because I don't know of many coaches who aren't willing to engage with ideas. So if you say read widely, then I think they'd be more than happy. I put good money that they'd be more than happy to read widely. There's a general willingness.
How much money would you put on it?
Well, I don't have that much, so I've got 2 new knees. So. but I'd be confident in a lot of the coaches that I know and have worked with. They're willing to have new ideas, but it's the relationship they have with those new ideas, and then the skills that they have developed in order to be able to think with those new ideas and have a willingness to engage them. In many ways, that's what you're trying to do with a degree, is you're trying to develop independent critical thinkers. Or you can obviously deconstruct that sentiment, but the idea is you're trying to give them a skill set that they are able to then engage with ideas and practice. That's what we're trying to do with our degree. And I think that's perhaps where the call in this work comes from, and how we can actually start to put some structures in place that and ideas in place that allow coaches to then engage with such reading. So it's not just reading anything, it's reading it with a particular eye on your practice. And if you start to read it with a particular eye on your practice, then you're probably going to be interested in certain things relating to your practice and how those certain ideas that you might read then might relate to it. And hopefully what we're trying to do is actually produce some of those ideas. Inevitably we turn to a lot of interactive, social, theoretical ideas in order to inform that. But it's having the willingness and the skill set in order to engage with those ideas. The idea of just giving a group of coaches a paper and then expecting them to understand a peer-reviewed academic journal paper, in my mind, is the current stage of the field is at right now is ludicrous. It's not going to work. And there's no idea that you end up with these artificial divides that we're identifying in the paper. So it's starting to think a little bit more in terms of how the steps we might put in place in order to filter that work down, to make it accessible, and then to help coaches actually identify, well, what's going to be relevant and what's not going to be relevant, or how can I think with certain ideas when I read widely. If I turn to something more radical, if I turn to art and try and pick artistic ideas off for my coaching, but having that ability to think critically in terms of what I'm trying to do here that relates to practice is probably the more fundamental part, as opposed to just go read widely and read whatever you like. It's having an ability, like the idea with the sensitizing concepts, to actually link this into practice, and how practice can then shape how you're reading a particular idea. Not that you need to understand everything, but you need to have a skill set that you can then be able to read it in a particular way that it has some relevance for your practice. I think that is the really interesting point that we, as a field and as a university in our degrees, we're still kind of grappling with as well. But I think we have quite a clear position with it, and making that jump is what the work needs to be done in terms of education.
I think building on that, one of the things we do within the workshops that we do, we coaches in particular, but coach educators as well, is that we're quite explicit up front in that we say we're making an argument here. We're building a case because we fundamentally believe that there's no view from nowhere. So take responsibility for what you say, for what you believe in, for how you act as a coach. So for the example of a power, okay, we try to make the argument that what you're involved in here is a powerful activity. You're trying to influence kind of somebody else to engage with your words and et cetera, et cetera. So once we have a discussion and a deconstruction of that, okay, then we invite them maybe to go and read a little bit more, in this area. And that's the hook that Charlie, is actually kind of speaking about. And so, it's when they leave is after kind of 3 days or after kind of 3 hours, then hopefully we've kind of stimulated their interest to go and read in that aspect. And this is the wider reading as opposed to looking up a YouTube of, really of how a famous coach coaches and thinking that's the only way that I can generate my new knowledge.
I do think what, with Charlie mentioned being critical and the consciousness of that way, and back to brave, it actually has to be a brave step on behalf of the coach because they tend to be uncomfortable then. And I don't think a lot of them like it. That's the one thing. It's not a nice experience for someone when suddenly they've been so certain in everything they've done over the years, then suddenly, and we've had experiences of this in the coaches we do, with the coaches we work with and the coach developers, is suddenly they're not comfortable anymore. I don't know anything with any certainty. And I do think you have to be brave to go there. And I do think that could be one reason sometimes people don't actually take on the challenge because they.
But we know that every single learning theory says you've got to go somewhere where you have not yet been, which implies uncertainty, ambiguity.
Yeah, so it comes on to the Vygotskian element of this. If you go, with the everyday concepts, you won't have this be uncomfortable. You won't be uncertain, and you'll just go from day to day. And you may work a few things out, but you will find things quite comfortable. Now, the argument is, as we've presented here, you put these ideas in, these theories in, and then suddenly it doesn't make you comfortable. And then it starts, I like the idea we've got to open up the avenues of possibilities we put in up there. Suddenly, actually, I'm not, you look at something which appeared to be familiar in the past, like a typical session, but then suddenly you open up and see it differently. And that's what the sensitizing concepts or scientific concepts, as Vygotsky puts them, it makes you see things differently. And then has an influence on you, to act, you can act with these ideas and use these ideas in your practice.
I think this is where, to go kind of full through the paper, do a proper service, is where authenticity links in as well. In terms of trying to understand one's position in the world. So linked into what we've already spoken about, we do quite a lot of work on the program of actually trying to, we ask the question frequently in some of the modules and some of the work we do with NGBs around who is the coach, who is coaching? And these are asking some quite existential authenticity type questions around one's possibility in the world, who's that person in the world, what is that position in the world, but not from a sense of freeness for everything. It's recognizing that freedom, recognize that responsibility that you can make choices, but you're not completely free either, and trying to kind of settle some of these tensions and understand how that fits in with the education and the ideas that are coming. So it's really trying to locate people from where they are, understand where they are, not from nowhere, but from where they are, and then expose new ideas to then move forward and start to get this relation between new ideas, practice, and the everydayness that they're subsequently linked to that. And not just a kind of an authenticity of, well, this is who I am. That would be, in fact, that would be the opposite. That would be very inauthentic, because it's not recognizing how others are shaping you, how you are shaped by the world. And so linked to what Gethin was saying there around the everyday and the scientific, there's actually a responsibility to do as everyone does sometimes, but recognizing that is really important. And that's, I suppose, a part of the argument. So it's not always this radicalness that we're claiming here either. That actually it's located in practice, and practice needs to be reproduced. It's stable. It should be ordered. We want order in our lives, and so it's recognizing that as a part of the process as well, and being able to recognize that then might be able to help recognize where some of these kind of leaps of faith might occur as well.
Let's talk a little bit about that particular idea. Existentialism, not something I imagine that many will have a firm grasp of. So can we do a quick, I say crash course in existentialism as if it would be a quick thing, but can we just add a bit of traction to that idea, because it's quite a complex one, but then talk about why that links so inherently to the authenticity ideas that you've just spoken about there, Charlie?
There's an easy throwaway answer to that, which is no, Michael. It's this thing akin to fast food is attractive. It's nice in lots of ways, but it's nothing akin to a gourmet food, which takes a long time to marinate, to spice, to taste, etc. So this is one of the difficulties really that we face, because we always think that you need kind of follow up, regarding the workshops that we do, the kind of seminars that we do. That's why we do courses that last a minimum of 18 months, which may be 6 residentials, each residential about kind of 3 days, with work in the interim, to do something, so 3 hours as little windows are very, very difficult to change the practice, work habits and customs, which are very, very strong. But we do give them something of a crash-ish course in existentialism. But what this is about is to emphasize more than anything that the existence comes before the essence, which goes to this idea that you can alter your practice as a coach. You can sculpt it. You can exist in the way that you want, rather than just replicate the essence of coaching. This is how I've watched coaching. This is how I have coached. So this is how I will coach. It's sheer reproduction. So we emphasize the fact that, and it goes to who is the coach that Charlie mentioned earlier. How do you want to behave as a coach? What are you trying to do here within your session, which starts at 6:30 on a Wednesday night? Precisely what? Why do you run why do you run your warm-ups in the way that you do? What are you trying to do here? So it goes to, well, actually, let me think a little bit more about that. And in order for me to reach that objective, maybe I should change my practice a little bit. So it gives you a great sense of agency, rather than this a tendency we see regularly to actually reproduce the practice. There's a great sameness in coaching, which is there for a good reason, but not always the best reason. So this is what existentialism, and it goes to ideas of authenticity that Charlie spoke about, which is not about you have to be honest, you have to be yourself. It is not related to that.
Yeah, that was quite a nice message that comes out of that and the paper in itself, in that coaches have that agency. I'm sure there's many coaches that are delivering sessions and delivering it in a way that they think they should be delivering it because someone said so, because a national governing body said this is the structure of your coaching session, you have to follow it. So there's something quite liberating about some of these ideas, as well as obviously serving the other purpose of trying to draw the lines together of theory and practice. But there's something quite liberating for coaches there. Very much an intention of the paper. I know the focus was more on drawing the theory and practice divide together, or trying to dispel that sort of artificial labelling or othering, if you like. But it's a sort of slightly separate intention. Are we feeling like coaches need an element of liberation as well?
Okay, the theory here was existentialism. And so the drawing, the indivisibility of the thing, you've just kind of highlighted there, because you lost the division in it.
it's not about reproducing, essentially. That's what we're trying to... I think that's what the key, a really crucial message is... So I go back to the memorizing idea of theory. If you just memorize something, you just come out and sprout it all out, and you're not thinking with the idea. And I think, quite simply, we're trying to produce, move forward, the ability to do something with these ideas, not just spout out or just copy what somebody does.
Good. So we've got existentialism out of the way, so that's that feels like a win for me. That was always going to be a challenging part of
super crash course.
These conversations. There's one more concept in here, and I'm going to come to Geth on this one. We're talking about Vygotsky here. So Geth, why Vygotsky?
I think we've had I've mentioned scientific concept and everyday concepts quite a lot. So again, it's that relationship between the everyday experiences, which, as I just said, if you keep relying on these everyday experiences, you end up sort of going nowhere. You can exist in that way, but to move beyond that and to see things afresh and see them new, and to be as productive, as we said, and having the agency over ideas, you've got to engage with new ideas. And in that relationship, we're talking about internalization. And then you suddenly, with that dualistic relationship, as you engage with these ideas in your practice, as you know, Mike, because you're an expert in this area as well, that you move forward, and then you can have an agency to interact with people and move forward in your coaching practice. I think so. The idea of transformation of yourself and of the learner as well.
You mentioned internalization there, but internalization is not quite as simple as you take an idea from a reading, a video, a podcast, dare I say it, and it becomes your own, it's internalized, and that's it. That then changes the way that you then experience afterwards. So that it's not just it goes internal and that's it, it's in, it stops. It comes back out again in the way that you view your experiences.
It's more than just internalizing, because once you can't, in a way, and I'm trying to explain this to people, if you internalize something, unless I do take action or activity, then it will never come out into the social. So you have to have the interaction with people in order to demonstrate internalization. So it's a sort of a nod to into subjectivity as well. You have to have the agreement between people, and there is an idea in the Vygotskian and cultural historical work where the objective, right? We've gone on to some dangerous ground here when we talk about objectivity. I can see Robin and Charlie looking at me, but there are social elements which are agreed upon, which exist within the society, within structures and things. And then coming to engage as individuals with these ideas is how you develop and learn. So it's engaging with, the theories that we talk about have been developed by human beings. And then you come to engage with these ideas, and you shape these ideas once you've internalized them as coaches. So, that's a sort of a quick crash course to Vygotsky, and hopefully, you can see you smiling because
there's a much longer episode that we've done specifically on some of Vygotsky's work earlier on in season 2. So I'll direct our listeners towards there if you want a bit more of a detailed overview of some of his ideas. There's a bit of conversation I want to circle back to, because we talked about this being quite a challenging thing for coaches. This is where the bravery comes in. If you have a look at these ideas, the 3 that have been presented, there's a consistent or somewhat similar vein of being back and forth. One informs the other, and then it goes back the other way. And so what's presented is actually something that doesn't really have an end point. It's something that's continuous. There's no end point to learning here. There's no end point to transformation. I think once you get your head around that idea, that in itself is quite an uncomfortable place almost to be. You're almost in a seemingly constant, iterative place, which...
Isn't that what coaches do? Isn't that what coaching is?
Sure, but is there no benefit to having levels of structure or comfort or
like
some
a
kind of
lay-by on the motorway,
security?
you mean, where you can have a bit of a break and... And a cup of coffee just to gather your thoughts before you go again.
Sure, but with challenge, quite often is, there's an accompaniment of like a need for an element of security, knowing that you're on the right path, knowing that you're sort of doing things that are actually of benefit. It's quite an uncomfortable place to be. So do we not still need to offer some words of wisdom, perhaps, for our listeners that are trying to engage with this concept or are coming around to the idea of this is just going to keep going and going and going? Because if it takes bravery and it's a challenging thing to engage with these kind of ideas, should we not offer an element of security as well at the same time?
I think you should offer them anything that makes this work, Michael, really. I'll
jump in there.
Sorry, go on,
because I was just going to say, once I understood there is no endpoint, that gave me security and I felt comfortable with it. My struggle over the years is trying to find the endpoint all the time. And once I'm looking for the endpoint, I'm always constantly looking for the endpoint, never get to the endpoint, and that becomes more frustrating for me. So that's how I've tried to deal with it.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I think it's a recognition and a consciousness. Because when you go out to coach, what you do, that knowledge about how you structured your session, about how you started and how you go on with it, has come from somewhere. It's been informed by something, some idea. So therefore, it's founded on something. So all we're asking you to do is to look for some new knowledge through the injection of new knowledge and to recognize that your next session is not going to be the same. It's going to be informed by something else. Now, you decide what that information is, where it comes from, the more insightful stuff away from the less insightful, so the French food as opposed to the fast food. You decide. You take responsibility for the knowledge, because we are who we are from the outside in. Are you the same person you were 5 years ago, Mike?
No. None of us are. Some of us really move in all sorts of ways, and some of us move nice and slowly or whatever with more care, blah, blah, blah. But we are always in a state of evolution. So you decide, which is the existentialism, existence before essence, what do you read to help you just make more sense of what you're going to do in your coaching with your athletes?
I think I'd add to that as well. It comes back to quality that we alluded to earlier in the talk, around the quality of what's being produced. If it's going to capture the everyday realities of what's happening on the ground, or if what's happening on the ground is messy, shifting, influx, uncertain, joyful, pleasurable, all of those things mixed together, then the quality of the work should reflect some of that as well. And so it then speaks to what's actually happening. Again, not trying to create a divide, but actually break that divide down, erase it. You speak about it in a way that actually captures the shiftingness of what's happening in coaching practice. I think if I think back to my degree experiences, one of the ways when I went through the degree here at Cardiff Met, and one of the kind of eureka moments, pivotal moments, is this kind of shift away from how-tos, how to do something. And you need a bit of how-to, particularly to start when you're novice. It's helpful, that order, the structure, the reproductive part. You need that, but it's also a eureka moment where you step away and go, right, actually, this is not happening in practice week in, week out. I'm turning up on a Saturday morning, I've got kids, it's windy, it's rainy, they don't want to be here. The parents are watching me, howling in the background, and all of a sudden, all my how-tos are not there. So this body of research that's claiming, right, do A, B, and C in practice, it's the quality just washes away instantly when I'm stood in front of all of these kids trying to impact them. And so what we're claiming for again is, can we speak about coaching in a way that actually is authentic in that regard, to use the word again, and try and find a way of speaking about it that actually captures some of that uncertainty around practice, and therefore it dissolves some of these issues that we're referring to. And I think one point I also really want to add in as well is there's something temporal about this. So the paper is time-stamped. It was published in 2023. And it's a reflection of where we were at the point of time of writing some of those ideas. And it should be read accordingly like that as well. that this is not in and of itself a grand theorization and explanation to kind of coin your term, an olive branch that will be a marquee point. It's a part of a series of steps that can be temporally placed, and it should be read accordingly like that. Like with all research, it is bound contextually and temporally. And I think that sentiment is really important to grasp, because it actually captures the sentiment of the paper and much of the work that we do. Like, it's located in a particular time and place and should be read accordingly, so that you can then take it forward into your time and places in which you're going to coach and act and behave and interact with others.
That's great. That leads us really nicely then to some concluding thoughts. We've been going for a little bit over an hour now. Where does this go next for the three of you, either as a group or separately? Where are you taking this from now?
That's really good point Charlie made there, because some of my thoughts have already moved on in relation to talked about Kant. I've looked at Hegel, so I've gone down a sort of philosophical route of looking at things, which, we're talking about challenging, and because a lot of the times I just made a note to myself here, we're talking about challenging for coaches. It's challenging for academics as well. Okay, these ideas aren't just challenging for everyone. Okay, so that's an important point to make. But that's where it's the time. You're always again moving with things, and there is no end point. So as Charlie mentioned, I've been going down that way, looking at other cultural historical theorists. I think we may have mentioned in the previous podcast, but that's where these ideas are going, and the idea of dialectical materialism in relation to theory and practice is quite an interesting thing to look at as well.
Echoing Charlie here, actually, without rewording him, it's not to say that what we've written here is absolutely right and static. But what it does show from our earlier writings, really as a group and individuals, is that it shows our thinking is moving. Sometimes it moves a little too fast, and maybe we haven't adequately explored everything we write about. But the thing is, is that the thinking is moving in a particular way, which has been thought through and considered. And so when we move, it's never in opposition to what we've already written. It's a development of, it's a progression. And this is kind of akin to our work as a group, because we've never been really interested in reproduction, in staying put. I think if you look at our really earlier writings, you can see a definitive change, if it's within the methodology, if it's within the expression, if it's within the just whatness of what really we're looking at in coaching. So we're very, I guess kind of nomadic, is the word that I would use, but not for its own sake. It's because there's this larger search, not for sociology, as Charlie says, it's not for psychology or social psychology, like a pedagogy. A coaching is what we study.
So our final segment of the podcast, as always, an opportunity to have a bit of a rant. I have a feeling what we may talk about, given the nature of the paper here, but would any of the three of you like to offer up some kind of a conversation, something that you've seen or something that you've read recently that you would like to have a go at dispelling before we finish?
I'll go for I can't remember if I mentioned this one before, but let the game be the teacher. So this is going on to the theory to practice idea of, again, experience, thinking it as the players will learn just through letting them play through experiences, and we don't need a coach. Or if you just shape the session in the way they will learn the game.
It's good. Putting ourselves out of a job when you say the game's going to be the teacher.
Well,
really,
I've seen it so many ways. We've seen it a few times in papers recently.
There we go. Nice, short and sweet. That brings us to the end. Many thanks to our guests today, Robyn, Charlie and Gethin. Appreciate your time. Don't forget you can check out their paper, Bordering, Connecting and Dispelling Within Sports Coaching, Erasing the Practitioner-Scholar Divide. We'll put links to that paper in the podcast description for you. Thanks again to the Sport Broadcast team for their continued support, particularly to Ellie and Alex that are helping us with all of our editing. We'll be back very soon with another episode. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast leave us a rating, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Cardiff Met Sports Coaching Hub podcast.
If you enjoyed the episode, leave us a rating and a review on your podcast platform. If you're watching on YouTube, like and subscribe.
If you want to stay up to date with all of the latest work coming out of the Coaching Hub, please follow us on social media.
All the links to our social medias are in the podcast description below.